Today's demonstration will be talking about how a landscape architect or landscape designer can use Vectorworks Landmark to create both a 2D and a 3D residential landscape plan within a 20 to 30 minute period of time, just to be able to show how quick the program can do both 2D and 3D representations of a project that would eventually help a designer or a landscape architect create very simple preliminary plans for their clients to be able to see if the area where they're going on a project is in the same direction that the client is wishing. They can use both these 2D and 3D representations to do studies on their own to make sure that what they have planned for the site will actually work, and if those spaces that they're creating are doing exactly what they're expecting to. In this example, I'm going to import a file to help us get started on the base plan. While I'm here, I want to explain some of the things that are available with Vectorworks by import. You can import DXF or DWG files, so if any of the files that you're creating actually can get started from a DWG file, you can bring those in and start working with them. You can also bring in image files, which allows you to bring in JPEGs, bitmap, TIFFs, and those kind of image files. So anything that you scan to, if it becomes an image file like that, you can bring that in. The one I'm going to display today is a PDF file, and by bringing in a PDF file, this allows us the opportunity to have what we refer to as a vector-based PDF, one that's been created by another design program. And by doing this, we actually have a drawing that was created by a surveyor that once they were finished with it and they created a PDF file for us, this file actually had snappable points for us. Because of the snappable points, we can actually bring this drawing up to a 1:1 scale by clicking on the point-by-point distance. I can actually pick on the two snap points of these property end lines, or endpoints of the property lines, to then determine what the distance needs to be for this. And in this case, the 56.42 feet is something that we see on the survey plan, helps us to become as accurate as possible with making this drawing at a 1:1 scale. So now that we've scaled it up to the right size, we can actually make this drawing file, anything that we put in here, to become at the same scale, 1:1. Anything inserted that's 5 feet wide would be 5 feet wide in the plan. So as we've got started here, we're going to use a landscape area tool to actually help us create a turf area that's represented not only in the 2D but the 3D side as well. So zooming in, I can capture some of these endpoints and start moving around the site, and zoom out a little bit more. We've got some snapping abilities on these endpoints, so that makes it a lot easier for us. With these points making up our property line, we have the ability to also do it with our arcs. We have the ability to create a point on arc mode, which allows us to emulate the same arc that we see in this drawing, and zooming in, I can snap to the same endpoint and see that the shape that I've created is now finished, and I have a 2D representation of the turf area that's going to be on my site. Now what I've noticed is that this is actually hiding the rest of my drawing, so I can send this object to the back until I'm finished with the rest of this. The landscape area that I just used to create this has many different uses, but in this case it's going to be a representation of not only the two-dimensional space here and reports the area to me, but it also has a 3D representation which I can assign a texture to. The next step that I want to take here is actually working with my footprint of the building. So instead of actually creating just a plain footprint that shows the boundary or the edges of the building face that I'm working with, I can actually emulate what we call a massing model that shows both the walls and the roof in my plan view, as well as a 3D object that looks like that structure in the 3D representation as well. So in this case, it again is operating off the polyline modes, and those polyline modes, as I'm tracing, gives me an advantage of trying to be as accurate as I can with the straight side, or with the straight edges. And as I continue around this building, I'll note that with the dimensions that are shown on this building, I could have tabbed in those dimensions if I had this in an orthogonal relationship, horizontal to my working plane. I could have worked from that angle and tab those dimensions in as well. So if you don't have the ability to snap to the PDFs like we are here, just know that you can be as accurate as you want as you're making these footprints as well, since you might have the dimensions of the building as well. Now when I created this, I actually wanted this to become in the house layer or house class, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in there now. And we'll see the actual 2D representation of this massing model showing up as the roof line that would have occurred on the project. But I know that some of the roof lines that are showing up here aren't exactly as they are. I've got some gables on the front and back that I want to emulate. So by using a customized roof and doing an edit of that massing model, I can actually grab that roof line and do a change to those gable lines. So by clicking on the handles that are facing those areas that I want to change to gables, I can click on that and make those changes interactively as well on the back side. And once I've finished, I've actually got a house that's more representative of what the house on that site really would look like. Now with this done, I want to take a break and just show you what this looks like in 3D so that we can see the changes that have been made for this plan and how that's going to be represented this quickly so far in our 3D realm. So with this done, and I put my rendering mode on, I have the ability to see those same two things that I just got done drawing in a 3D aspect, and I can start seeing how this site is kind of working together on this project. So with that done, I can go back to my top plan, and once I've done that, the next step is creating my hardscapes. So I can actually do a process that is helpful for me by rotating the plan so that this drawing can become horizontal to make my drafting a little bit easier. So by picking on 2 points that I know that I want to be level, I can pick those 2 points, rotate my plan, and start creating with some geometrical shapes. Now I'm going to get into the class for the driveway for this object, and I'm just creating a simple rectangle. This rectangle can emulate the shade of the or the color of the driveway, but once I convert it to a hardscape, this can actually be represented as my driveway, both in 2D and 3D. So with my hardscape settings, I can actually label this as driveway. And the reason why it's important for me to put labels on these is because these can report to a worksheet that would eventually be helpful for me to know as I'm reporting my material takeoffs. In this case, I'm not going to have a joint pattern because it's just a solid driveway, and I won't have a border either. But I do want it to show up in 3D, and I can just have it give kind of a profile that's maybe 2 inches above grade. So with that done, I can move on to my next step, which is creating hardscapes for my walkway. And I can either create shapes again, or I can actually trace it out in a polyline form. So with that done, I can lock onto my lines. And as I'm working around in my drawing, you'll see that I still have that snap ability because of my vector-based PDF. And when I'm finished, I want to make sure I still end up on the same line that I started. When I finished, I actually noticed that this hardscape needs to be in its own class other than the driveway. So when I click on this hardscape and I go to convert it, I can also convert it to that same class that it needs to be on, and actually affect, when I change this to a hardscape, that this one will actually have some border information and some hatch information as well. So in this case, I'm going to call it front walk, and I do want it to have a pattern. I'll just give this one, say, a flagstone with a 2-foot size hatch on there. I want to give it a kind of a brick border, maybe a brick soldier course. And I might even give it a brick color so that it emulates what I'm trying to convey. Again, I want this to be about 2 inches off the grade, represented in 3D. And we'll notice that it shows up there just as we had planned. And I can actually draw another hardscape in the back using a couple other shapes. So with my same pattern showing up, I can do the same thing by drawing some other shapes in here and adding them together as a surface. And once I've added them, I can do the same conversion and create this hardscape as well on the back. Now, because it's actually a different hardscape, I want to make sure that I've labeled it as my back patio, so that when it's reported for quantity takeoffs, it does the same thing as well. So in this case, I might actually provide a different kind of hatch. It's going to be the same size hatch, but I'm going to put it at a 45-degree angle. Again, I still want my brick border. Still want this one to show up in 3D as well with a 2-inch profile. So I've quickly been able to assemble my hardscapes on this plan, showing a little bit of an example of how I could see this backyard looking. Now I've noticed that my massing model appears like it's kind of sitting below those, so I can send it to the front so that in plan view it actually looks the way it should on, in this case, and with what I'm showing in my 2D plan view. And at this point I can actually let go of my PDF because I've traced out most of the stuff that I needed to see in this drawing, and notice that because I've done that, I've got my turf area back, my driveway still showing, everything is just exactly how I want. So the next step that I need to go to is actually placing plants. And before we do that, we actually need to rotate our plan back to our original form, which is also known as our top plan view. So just by clicking on top plan, you'll notice that it unrotates our plan from where we had it. So now that we are able to start placing plants, we want to make sure that the labels are staying at the same horizontal plane that we have for our design field here in our design layer. So now that we've rotated it back, let's look at our place plant tool. Within Vectorworks Landmark, you have the ability to place individual single plants, or you can place groupings of plants that don't necessarily have a specific relationship of spacing to each other. You can also place groupings of plants that are equally spaced to each other, perhaps it's a head or tree row, even a street tree line. You could also place plants in a group which could either be in a grid format or even a triangulated offset mode. In this case, I'm actually just getting ready to place one plant. It's going to be my shade tree in the front yard. So if I place that symbol right smack dab in the front, I have the ability at this point, again, I need to place this in its proper class. So this is going to be plants proposed, and I'll actually get myself into that class so that all the plants that I create after this point are going to be in the same class, just to keep my organization method the same. So with this one picked, I can actually go into the object information palette and make sure that the layer or the label is actually coming out on the correct side. And with my edit mode on, I can bring that label over to the side so that I have enough room for the label and the plant material to exist all in the same plan. In this case, it's still showing me that it's just a generic shade tree. So if I double click on this and go to its definition, I can actually start assigning plant material information to this symbol. So not only can this symbol represent something very graphic and illustrative in 2D, it's also carrying data object information to it. So every time I'm placing a symbol on the plan, I'm also placing data. So in this case, I can assign the scientific name, the common name, any of the information that I want this plant to carry with it. But if I'm not really sure which plant material I want to look at, or if I don't know the exact spelling, I could actually look it up through our plant data list. And by isolating the information that's held within Vectorworks Landmark associated with trees, we see that we have about 568 trees to choose from. So if I actually do know the tree that I'm looking for, I can go through the list and pick the one that I would prefer to use. But perhaps in this case, I actually have more criteria that's been set aside by our client that they would like to see fulfilled in this plant. So if I go to our plant database, this will help me pick the best plant to use for that location and by information associated with its characteristics. So as I'm going into the plant database under the plant data fields, I have listings that I can find through its category. I'll pick tree or trees, and I can also pick the height. In this case, it'll be somewhere around 35 to 50 foot tall. I have some hardiness zone requirements, making sure that the plant is definitely hardy in the area where we're placing it. And in this case, I can actually pick some fall color. The client would prefer something red fall color. And if we have other characteristics such as its salt or drought tolerance, whether or not it had a flower color, any other information that helps me isolate some more information about these plants, I can pick that at this point and then hit find. And once that's chosen, we notice that we have about 7 plants out of our whole database. It's almost 5,200 plants strong that fit the category of trees with all of the characteristics that we've picked from. So in this case, I can thumb through the pages to see some of the plant material that is available. And some of these I actually do have some plant photos already associated with. But perhaps I come up to one called Acer rubrum red sunset, and think, well, this fits the bill and it sounds like something that's pretty available. If I check my catalogs, I might see that that's the case. And so in this case, I can actually do a web data search to see what I can find out about this plant. Now in this case, we have the opportunity to add photos right directly to our page. So I might pick something that looks a little bit more established. Maybe I'll find a summer picture of the tree, and maybe I'll find something that shows some fall color, and maybe even something that shows a little bit of detail about the shape of the leaf. So with this information showing here, if we need to show information as far as where we got these images, you definitely have the opportunity to do that through our image credits. In this case, I also want to demonstrate that the fact that there's some other sites that you could visit to get some other information about these plant materials. Google was one, another one is Wikipedia. So any of the information that you see, it seems like they do have a little bit of information, but not a lot. USDA plant database, they also don't have a lot on this specific species. And we could also go to the Monrovia site and see if they have information. There's a relationship now between Monrovia and Vectorworks to be able to help fortify some of the information we have with our plant data, as well as some of the imagery, so we could thumb through some of their pictures and pick some out as well. In this case, I'm actually done finding some of the plant images that I need. And if I come back to the plant data information, notice all the information has been filled out from the plant database. We also have the pictures that are associated with it. So if I come over and I go to the file print, I can actually print this information out for our clients to use as something that they can take home, or maybe even we might use some of this in a municipal review session. So with this information held, I could actually just copy one of these photos and eventually take it into the plan that I'm working on. So after I close the plant database, I come back into the plant list that I was picking at, and with this I'll go to my Acer rubrum and find the same plant that I was just looking at, hit OK, and notice that it's already populated my plant definitions with that data that's associated with it. I have the ability to change the shadows, the graphic qualities of this object. I have the ability to add information to its plant data, and I also have the ability to start messing with some of the spacings or some of the other ways that this plant is going to be showing up, and also how that plant tag is going to be represented. With all this set, I'm ready to take a look at how this plant is showing up, and at this point I can go ahead and paste that photo that I had, place it right above that plant material that I was picking, and be able to show the client, even on our plan, how this plant material is going to look and where it's going to be represented on our plan. At this point I'm actually ready to place some more plants on here, and in this case I'm going to do a kind of an ornamental tree. Zoom in a little bit so I can get some placement here. In this case I've got one there. Maybe I'll place an irregular grouping of some trees down in the corners. And as these are placing, notice that it's got relationships to each other, and as I'm done placing this grouping, we actually have a plant tag that's showing the total quantity of those in that bottom grouping. And we can also continue placing plants with other plant materials. So in this case we'll move on to our evergreens and do something somewhat similar. I want these placements of this plant material to be relative as well. So I might actually place some of these in other placements here that still have a relationship to each other, but they're not necessarily equally spaced. And when I'm done, you'll notice that this plant tag as well has been associated with them off to the side, and it's also counting them. Now if I change the way that these plant material is being shown, if I take some plants away, our plant tag will actually readjust with it. In this case I noticed that the plant material that I placed, the hawthorn, I'd like the canopy from it to actually reside above, so I'm going to send it to the front so that graphically my plant is actually showing up a little more how I prefer. The next placing of plants that I want to do is actually going to be some perennials, so I'm going to place some hydrangeas in through here. And actually in this one I'm going to use kind of an equally spaced mode, but I'm going to do this in a way that they're not necessarily going to be in a straight line. Maybe I'll bend it in a little bit as the bed undulates. But notice that they do actually carry on the same spacing mode, In this case, I've got all of them placed, and I've got a number that's showing up, 7 of these hydrangeas being placed, and it looks like I need to actually readjust some of the placements of my labels. So at this point I can take just a few minutes and affect the way that these plant tags are being shown, so that my my planting plan can look a little bit more organized. I don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time doing this, but I wanted to show you some examples of how we can actually make our plant material more representative of how we choose our planting plans to look, so that in the end we have a little bit more organized look to the way our plant material is being shown. So with that being done, the next step that I would demonstrate is actually being able to bring in a plant list. And by bringing in the plant list, we have a object information palette, or I'm sorry, a resource browser. And by clicking on the resource browser and picking the correct folder of information, this is the same folder that I would grab my 2D plant symbols from, and these 2D plant symbols are definitely showing up in the 2D realm of what they would be exhibiting, but realize that any of these plant symbols that I'm picking from here can actually be made into hybrid objects. So it's not only going to have a 2D representation, that I can actually hybridize the 3D representation with it as well. But before I get to any further with that, I want to drag this plant list in, and with it being placed in the plan, you'll notice that I only have a few plants that are showing up in here, but those plants are actually represented. It's been documented right into my worksheet, and as my plant list starts growing, I can right click on this at any time and click recalculate, and my worksheet would update with as much plant material as I have shown here. This includes being able to replace plants as well. Now at this point in time, I can also start drawing some planting beds, and with the same tool that I used before, if I get into my bedline class, I can use that same landscape area tool to actually do some free-form design. So if I zoom in a little bit closer, I'm just going to do some basic free drawing with a Bezier polyline mode. It gives me a kind of a good example of how this bedline might be represented. I could probably do something a little bit more specific when the plan comes into a tighter fruition, and I know exactly how much space I want to take up with this planting. But just for a quick example, I wanted to show the client basically how this bed might show up in a finished format. And notice again here we're showing this right on top of each other, so I actually want some of the plant material to rise above it. So by clicking on them and asking them to be sent to the front, we still have that planting bed showing up, but it's actually beneath our symbols. So if I click off of that, we can see the representation of the bed underneath it. That bed is still showing up information in our 3D realm, and by turning this plan now into a 3D realm, I wanted to show how this simple plan that we just created, both 2-dimensionally and 3-dimensionally, can now be shown to our clients as we're getting our thoughts pulled together. So remember, we talked about how the plant material can be 2D and 3D, and in this case we've got an example of how each of these plants have been married with a image prop. And this image prop is actually associated directly with those 2D symbols in a manner of its 3D edit mode. So anytime I click on the symbols, I can affect the way that it looks 3-dimensionally in its 3D edit mode. In this case, I can show the client how this site is working out, either by panning them around this way, if I spin the drawing around and show them all of the vantage points. But I can also show them how this drawing is looking out by doing a simple walkthrough. So if I come to the top plan view and say that I bring this drawing to a point where I'm on my porch or my back patio, I want to set a 3D view from the back of the house looking towards my landscape. And I can actually start it at a 5-foot height, looking at a 5-foot height, say with a normal perspective. It'll actually take me right to that view, and I can expand my view a little bit so that I can see a little bit more. perspective of how the site is working out, turn on my rendering mode, and this is a very simple method of choosing our visualization tool called the walkthrough. And if I hold this cursor in the middle, we can actually proceed through the space. And any further I go away from center, it gives me a faster movement. But I could also just kind of go gradually and walk them around the house, just to kind of show them how their site is pulling together. Even show them how their existing driveway is in place, as well as the new shade tree we showed. Anything that we've represented in here as both 2D and 3D would show up. And if we had changing sites, such as something that you'd see on a site model, those could be represented in this plan as well. You don't necessarily always have to be working on a flat site. And these walkthroughs are a little bit more dramatic, especially if you do have a changing site, because you are able to help the client better understand how the topography of their site is working.